My family made me the outsider while my brother faked illness for attention. I walked away to save myself, but when the truth came out, it shattered everything I thought I knew. You ever spend your whole life trying to earn something from people who were never planning to give it to you in the first place? That's how it felt growing up in my family, like I was waiting in line for a ticket they'd already handed to someone else. And when I finally stopped waiting and made my own happiness, they acted like I was the traitor. But nothing prepared me for the day I found out my little brother had been faking the one thing that stole every spotlight, every chance, every ounce of love they could have given me. He faked it all. And by the time I found out, the damage had already been done. I grew up in a neighborhood just outside of Chicago where the lawns were tidy, the neighbors waved hello, and from the outside, my family looked just like everyone else's: middle class, 4-bedroom house, summer road trips, and a golden retriever named Max. But appearances are a funny thing, man. Behind our clean curtains and freshly cut grass, something darker was always simmering. When I was 11, my little brother Neil, he was 8 at the time, got diagnosed with asthma after he had a breathing scare during a soccer game. The doctors said it was mild, manageable, nothing too serious. But to my parents, it was like they'd just been told he was fighting for his life every single day. It started small. Mom kept him home from school just in case his symptoms flared. Dad skipped work to take him to appointments for every tiny sneeze or wheeze. At first, I didn't question it. I figured they were just scared, being cautious. But over time, it felt like they weren't parenting anymore. They were orbiting Neil like planets around a sun that barely noticed I was even in the same solar system. I remember one night like it was yesterday. I had this big piano solo at my school's winter concert, something I'd practiced for months. My teacher had pulled me aside to say how impressed she was, even said the piece was usually for older students, but I was ready. That morning, both my parents promised they'd be in the front row, cheering me on. I left for school smiling like a fool. By evening, they texted me a quick, "Sorry, honey, Neil's not feeling well again. We have to stay home." No call. No encouragement. Just silence and an empty seat I had to pretend wasn't mine to look for. Later that night, my grandma called to check on Neil, worried like we all were, and she told me what she heard over the phone. Neil wasn't in bed with a nebulizer or wrapped in blankets. He was in the living room playing video games, laughing with a mouthful of popcorn. It wasn't a one-off. It became a pattern. Every time I had something big, an award ceremony, a science fair, even my 16th birthday party, something would mysteriously flare up with Neil. One time, I found out my parents left a party thrown for me with the cake still in their car because Neil needed to be rushed to urgent care. Later? Turns out he had allergies. Seasonal. Nothing a little Benadryl couldn't have fixed. And still, every time, they'd look me dead in the eye and say, "Family comes first." But what they really meant was, Neil comes first. At my high school graduation, I stood on that stage as valedictorian, staring out at a sea of families. I'd worked myself raw for that honor, part-time jobs, late-night studying, no social life, no help from them. And when I scanned the crowd for my parents, I didn't see them. Just my best friend's mom, waving at me like I was her own. My parents stayed home because Neil had finals stress. His exams weren't even until the following week. You start to learn your place in the family real fast when you grow up with someone like that. You start to shrink, bit by bit, until you stop expecting anything at all. But the part that still gets under my skin? I spent years believing Neil was just unlucky. That maybe it wasn't his fault. Maybe he couldn't help it. Maybe I was the selfish one for wishing just one day, just one, could be mine. But I had no idea, not back then, what was really going on. Not until after my wedding. Not until it was too late to undo all the damage he'd done. You know, they say weddings are supposed to bring families together. But all mine did was shine a spotlight on everything we'd been sweeping under the rug for years. When Jamie, my now wife, and I got engaged, I knew the day was coming where I'd have to face a choice I'd been putting off my whole life. Do I let my family ruin one more big moment, or do I finally draw a line in the sand? Jamie's family? Man, they were like something out of a different world. Her parents showed up to every little event, birthdays, job promotions, even small work parties, like they actually mattered. Her sisters made signs for her 5K charity runs and hosted Sunday dinners like clockwork. When I first met them, I didn't know how to act. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, but it didn't. They were just good. Supportive in ways I hadn't known existed. I remember Jamie's mom giving me a hug after I told her about my job interview and saying, "You've got this, kid." I almost cried in her kitchen. That's how starved I was for someone to just care. So when we started planning the wedding, I felt torn in two. On one hand, I wanted to believe my family could show up and be different just this once. On the other, every memory screamed at me not to bet on them. I pictured Neil wheezing through the ceremony or my mom whispering to the pastor that they'd need to cut things short because Neil wasn't feeling well. I could see my dad looking down at his phone during our vows, waiting for the next dramatic update from home. We talked about it, Jamie and I, for weeks. She never pushed, never tried to influence me either way. Just listened. That made the choice easier somehow. After one especially long night, I said it out loud, I don't want them there. And I waited for her to flinch. She didn't. The guest list got shorter. 80 people. All people who made an effort to be in our lives. Jamie's dad offered to walk her down the aisle and she said she'd be honored. Her mom helped her get ready, her sisters were bridesmaids, and every single one of them treated me like I belonged. My own family? They found out through a cousin who posted pictures online. That's when the storm hit. My phone lit up like the 4th of July. Voicemails. Texts. My mother crying, calling me cruel. My dad furious, saying I'd embarrassed them in front of the family. Neil didn't say much, but he didn't have to. They spoke for him like they always did. You've always resented your brother, my mom said. He can't help being sick. But that was the thing, somewhere deep down I'd always wondered if that was true. If Neil really couldn't help it. Or if we'd all just been caught in a pattern none of us knew how to break. Then came the updates from my cousin Kay. Turns out Neil hadn't been laid up with anxiety after seeing the wedding photos like my parents claimed. He'd been at a baseball game, laughing with friends, posting selfies with a hot dog in one hand and a beer in the other. I stared at that photo for a long time. That same night they said he was struggling to breathe from stress. He was in the stands having the time of his life. That's when the floor cracked beneath me. Jamie's mom, who'd worked as a pediatric nurse for over 30 years, offered to talk to my parents. She wasn't trying to start trouble. She just wanted to help. Maybe she thought if she came at it from a medical angle, they'd listen. But when she gently mentioned that Neil's symptoms didn't quite line up with his active lifestyle, hiking, late-night parties, recreational soccer, my mom hung up on her. Worse, she then called Jamie's sister and told her that Jamie's mother was interfering in things she didn't understand. And that's when it hit me full force. They didn't want to understand. They needed the story to be real even if it wasn't. I started remembering things I had locked away, like the homecoming dance when I was 17. I'd saved for months to buy a dress I'd been dreaming of. Neil came down with sudden stomach pain that night. They rushed him to the ER. I waited for them in my dress for hours. My date left without me. Neil's diagnosis? Gas. Not appendicitis. Not a blockage. Just gas. It was always something. Always him. And I always came second if I even registered at all. But the biggest blow was still coming. The one that would rewrite everything I thought I knew. You think you've accepted something when you've lived with it long enough. I thought I had. I thought I'd buried the pain, tucked it away under enough life experience and forward momentum that it couldn't hurt me anymore. But all it took was one conversation with my cousin Kay to rip the lid off everything I'd been trying not to see. She called me a few weeks after the wedding just to talk, she said. She was one of the few in the family who hadn't called to berate me after the photos went up. She'd sent a card instead with a quiet, "You did what you had to do." That meant more than I could say. When we met for coffee, she looked nervous. Said there was something she needed to tell me, something she should have told me a long time ago. I braced myself, not sure what was coming, but what she said next knocked the wind out of me. Neil admitted to me once, she said, that he used to fake being sick. On purpose. I blinked, not sure I heard her right. She nodded, eyes fixed on her coffee cup like it held the rest of the story. It was years ago, at a family party. He was drunk. He said it started when you got that piano solo in middle school. Said he didn't like that you were getting all the attention. So he pretended to have trouble breathing that night just to see what would happen. I sat there stunned, silent. She kept talking. He said our aunt called your mom that night and Neil was playing video games. He told me it became a game after that. How easily he could get your parents to drop everything. If he said he had a headache or chest tightness, they'd come running. No questions asked. She paused. He said he didn't even feel guilty. Not back then. I didn't know what to say. Everything in me wanted to believe there had been some misunderstanding. That maybe Neil was just exaggerating. That maybe Kay had heard him wrong. But then she pulled out her phone. I didn't know if I should show you this, she said. But I think you deserve to see it. It was a text thread, from my mom to Kay, dated a few days before the wedding. It was the kind of thing you read once and hope you're misinterpreting. But I wasn't. The texts were about the wedding. About my wedding. In one, my mom wrote, "We need to keep an eye on Neil that day. all the attention on me could trigger his anxiety. Maybe we should come up with a backup plan in case he needs support. Then another, if he doesn't feel well during the ceremony, maybe we can excuse ourselves, just so people remember what's really important. I stared at those words like they were written in another language. But they weren't. They were plain, cold, and deliberate. They were planning to steal my day, before they even knew they weren't invited. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. It wasn't just neglect anymore. It wasn't even blind favoritism. It was calculated. It was manipulation wrapped in the mask of concern. They were ready to sabotage my wedding before they even knew they weren't welcome. It was that moment. More than any missed birthday, more than any ghosted graduation, more than any abandoned childhood event, that made the whole thing real. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I'd spent years doubting myself, wondering if I was just too sensitive, if I was the one making things worse. But there it was, in black and white, proof. Kay shared those texts with other relatives, some of the ones who had called me selfish for not inviting my parents. Suddenly, the tone shifted. Apologies started rolling in. My uncle called me crying, said he wished he'd spoken up years ago when he first noticed the pattern, said he hadn't wanted to rock the boat. That boat had already sunk. Kay and I spent the rest of the afternoon sharing stories, piecing together memories that suddenly made more sense. Like the time Neil twisted his ankle at a picnic the same afternoon I was set to sing in a community choir event. Or the time I got into a prestigious science camp and couldn't go because Neil had a mysterious respiratory issue that required constant care all summer. Every time I stood to shine, he stumbled into a shadow of his own making. And my parents? They always followed the shadow. I tried reaching out to Neil after that, sent him a long message. I didn't yell or accuse. I just told him I knew. I told him what Kay had said and asked if any part of it was true. I asked if he ever regretted it, if he ever thought about what it cost me. He didn't answer. Not at first. But a few days later, I got a different kind of message. One I never expected. When Neil's name popped up in my inbox, I didn't open it right away. I just stared at it, sitting there like a ticking bomb, like opening it would either bring some closure or just split the wound wide open again. I must have paced the room for 10 straight minutes before I clicked on it. The message was long. No emojis. No casual tone. Just raw paragraphs. As if he'd been carrying the weight of it for years and finally had no choice but to let it fall. He started with, "I know I don't deserve a response, but I need to say this anyway." He admitted everything. Said it began when he was a kid and noticed our parents only really dropped everything when he was sick. Said the first time he lied, he just wanted to see what would happen. One fake asthma attack turned into a week of attention, fast food, skipped chores, and praise for being so brave. He said it was addictive, that he didn't understand how wrong it was at the time. But even when he did, he didn't stop. Because by then, it was too easy. He confessed to faking dozens of episodes, most of them timed around my milestones, concerts, birthdays, graduations. Said he felt a rush every time our parents dropped me like an afterthought to rally around him. "I was jealous," he wrote. "You were the smart one, the driven one, the one who never needed anyone. And I couldn't compete with that. So I made myself the center by default. I made myself the emergency." He said he's been in therapy for a while now, that he started going for anxiety, but eventually, his sessions cracked open the truth he'd buried under years of lies. Said that seeing the screenshots from Mom's messages, the ones Kay shared with him, made him sick. "I always thought it was me," he wrote, "but seeing her plan that, it made me realize it wasn't just me. They enabled it. They needed it to be true. Because you being okay without them scared them more than me falling apart." That line stuck with me. Still does. He talked about guilt. About how he couldn't believe the way he'd minimized my achievements, how he'd let our parents turn my entire adolescence into a supporting role in his show. He remembered the homecoming night too. Said he pretended his stomach hurt just enough to get attention, but never thought I'd miss the entire dance. Said he watched from the car window as I stood in the living room, dress on, staring at the driveway like I was waiting for someone to come rescue me. He never forgot it. Neither did I. Neil wrote that he doesn't expect forgiveness. That he's finally looking for a full-time job so he can move out and cut the financial leash that's kept him tethered to their approval. I know they'll retaliate when they find out I sent this, he wrote. But if that's the price of truth, then so be it. He asked to meet. Just coffee. Just to talk. I showed the message to Jamie and she read it quietly, face unreadable. When she finished, she said something I wasn't expecting. He sounds like he's finally waking up, she said. But just because he's waking up doesn't mean you're responsible for where he lands. She was right. The weight of Neil's apology didn't erase the years I spent as an afterthought. It didn't change the fact that our parents weren't just fooled, they were complicit. They wanted a crisis. And Neil was the tool they used to create one. Because the truth is, I don't think it was ever just about Neil's health. It was about control. It was about how they could always pull attention back to themselves by pointing to their sick child and making sure everyone saw how noble they were for sacrificing so much. Even if those sacrifices came at my expense. And when they found out Neil had finally apologized, they lost it. Neil left his email open during a visit home. My parents saw the message. And they didn't cry. They didn't apologize. They threatened to cut him off. Just like that. They told him if he kept siding with me, the car they paid for was gone. His apartment? Gone. No more help. No more financial support. Nothing. But this time, Neil didn't back down. He told them he'd been living in a prison made of comfort and manipulation and he'd rather be broke than dishonest one more day. And I'll be honest, that shook me. Because for the first time in my life, my brother finally chose the truth. And it wasn't about me. It wasn't even about redemption. It was about him finally stepping out of the story they'd written for him and deciding to live his own. He said he's applying for jobs in Boston, where Jamie and I are moving next month, and that he hopes we can talk again once we're both in new territory. I haven't said yes yet. I'm not sure I'm ready. But what I do know is this. I'm no longer the kid waiting for someone to show up. I'm no longer the son who bends and breaks to keep the peace while someone else fakes a crisis. And for the first time in years, I finally feel free. Moving day came faster than I expected. Jamie and I packed our lives into boxes, loaded up a rental truck, and left the only version of home I'd ever known behind. Boston was calling, a fresh start, a new job at a biotech firm for me, and a research appointment for Jamie that made her beam like a kid on Christmas morning. But even with everything changing around us, that message from Neil lingered in my mind like a song stuck on repeat. We got settled fast. Jamie's family flew in to help unpack, bringing casseroles and framed photos like they were decorating a home and a heart at the same time. Her dad installed curtain rods, her mom filled our kitchen with spices, and her youngest sister made a chalkboard wall calendar we didn't ask for but somehow loved instantly. It was everything a beginning was supposed to feel like, except my head was still somewhere back in Chicago, standing in front of a laptop screen rereading Neil's apology. A week after we moved, Neil sent another message. He said he'd gotten a job, full-time, entry-level, nothing glamorous, but enough to pay his own way. He'd moved out of the apartment our parents paid for and was staying with a friend until he could afford a place of his own. Said it was the first time in his life he'd made a decision that wasn't about pleasing them. I don't expect to be part of your life, he wrote. But I just wanted you to know I'm trying. For the first time, I'm trying for real. It hit me harder than I expected. Not because it fixed anything, but because for the first time he wasn't asking for anything. He just wanted me to know he was standing on his own feet. And that meant something. Jamie saw me reading the message and didn't say anything at first. Just sat beside me, her arm brushing against mine like a silent question. When I finally looked over, she said, "Do you want to meet him?" I didn't know. Part of me did. Part of me didn't. I'd spent so long blaming Neil that I hadn't fully processed the other side of it, that he was a product of our parents' dysfunction just as much as I was. That while I had been invisible, he had been smothered. My pain was abandonment. His was manipulation masked as affection. And maybe, just maybe, that deserved to be acknowledged. So I agreed. We set a date to meet halfway between Boston and where he was staying. A neutral coffee shop. Public. No pressure. The morning of the meeting, I felt like I was heading into court, not a cafe. Jamie offered to come with me, but I told her no. This was something I needed to do alone. When I walked in, Neil was already there, back straight, hands clasped around a cup he clearly hadn't touched. He looked older than I remembered. Not physically, but in the way his eyes moved, like he'd seen something inside himself and wasn't sure how to carry it yet. I sat down. We didn't speak right away. Then he said it. "I don't know how to begin." I shrugged. "You already did." That message, it was a start. He nodded slowly, like he didn't quite believe I was giving him a sliver of grace. We talked for over 2 hours. He told me things I didn't know. That he often overheard our parents belittling me behind closed doors. That mom once said, he doesn't need us, he'll be fine, like that was a flaw. That dad used to sigh and say, he's just too intense. I wish he'd lighten up. He told me he started faking episodes not because he hated me, but because he didn't think he could be like me. So he became what they needed instead, the broken one. The one who made them feel needed. Loved. Essential. I didn't realize they were using me, he said. Until I saw how willing they were to hurt you even when I didn't ask them to. He said Kay's messages opened a door he'd spent years pretending didn't exist. And that once he walked through it, he couldn't unsee anything. Then he asked something I wasn't expecting. Do you think there's a way back? For us, I mean not them. Just us. I looked at him, this person who'd once taken every spotlight I'd earned. Who'd played sick while I stood in silence, hoping someone would see me. And I realized that as much damage as he'd done, he was trying. He was standing in front of the wreckage, not hiding from it. He wasn't asking me to forget. He was asking if we could build something new from what was left. I don't know yet, I said. But I'm willing to figure that out. One step at a time. We left the cafe without hugging. No dramatic reconciliation. Just a shared glance that said, maybe we start here. Later that night, I told Jamie everything. She nodded and said, proud of you, babe. No matter what happens next. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to earn approval. I wasn't begging for recognition. I was just living and learning what it meant to heal. Healing's a funny thing. It doesn't come all at once. It's not like a door you open and suddenly everything is light and clean and quiet. It's more like an old house, you clear out one room and feel good about it, but then you open a closet and something you forgot was broken falls out and hits you in the chest. That's how it felt the weeks after meeting with Neil. We weren't brothers in the way some guys are, cracking beers and swapping childhood stories. We weren't there yet. But something had shifted. Our conversations, while still guarded, became more frequent. Little texts. An article link. A memory, sometimes painful, sometimes funny, that one of us would send like tossing a rock into a pond just to see if the other would respond. He kept his word about standing on his own. Got a studio apartment. Said it was small, but it was his. He picked up extra shifts at the office and even joined a hiking group. Turns out he texted me one morning, you don't need asthma meds when you're not pretending to wheeze all the time. I laughed harder at that than I should have. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. That was the thing with Neil now, he didn't try to hide what he'd done. He didn't sugarcoat it or run from it. He owned it. And I think that's the only reason I didn't shut him out for good. But while things between Neil and me were slowly starting to rebuild, things with our parents went from bad to worse. At first, I ignored their messages, voicemails swinging between anger and desperation, texts from mom filled with biblical guilt trips, and dad's signature silence broken only by the occasional, you're tearing this family apart. But then they crossed a line. One morning I got an email from my father. Short. Cold. The subject line read, "Real daughters don't act like this." I almost deleted it without reading. But I didn't. I needed to see how far they were willing to go. In it, he accused me of manipulating Neil. Said I'd poisoned his mind and turned him against his own blood. Said I should have included them in the wedding, that maybe if I had, things wouldn't have spiraled. Then he ended with, "You owe this family an apology before it's too late." Before what's too late? That question stayed with me. I forwarded the email to Neil. Asked him if they'd been contacting him too. He replied within minutes. "Yeah, they threatened to cut me off completely unless I moved back home and blocked you." I told them I wasn't interested in going backward anymore. I didn't realize how hard I exhaled until Jamie walked over and put her hand on my shoulder. She'd read the message over my shoulder and didn't say anything at first. Finally, she said, "That's the first time he's chosen you over them, isn't it?" It was, and it mattered more than I expected it would. But even that fragile progress didn't stop the barrage. My parents started reaching out to Jamie's family. First polite messages, then passive-aggressive complaints. Jamie's mom, God bless her, finally responded with a firm, medical-grade dressing down. "Your son is not your scapegoat. Your enabling of Neil's behavior went on for far too long, and you have no business blaming him for setting boundaries now. Please do not contact us again." They didn't take it well. Within hours, my sister-in-law got a message from my mother, calling Jamie's family interfering strangers who don't understand our history. That was the thing, they always clung to the past like it gave them a right to keep hurting people in the present. And the more they realized I wasn't coming back, the more they panicked. Then came the final blow. Kay sent me another round of texts she'd found. Ones our mother had sent to an aunt we don't talk to much. In them, my mother blamed everything on me. Said I'd always been emotionally cold, that I'd never appreciated the sacrifices they made, and that the wedding was my way of punishing Neil for being loved more. That last line, it burned. Punishing Neil for being loved more. That was the truth they didn't mean to let slip. That in their eyes, the problem wasn't how I'd been treated. It was that I dared to reject it. I didn't respond to the messages. I didn't yell. I didn't try to explain myself like I used to when I was 17 and desperate to be seen. I just stared at the screen, heart pounding but steady. Jamie asked if I was okay. I looked at her and said, "I think I'm done." And I meant it. I blocked their numbers. Sent one final email telling them not to contact me anymore. I told them I was building a life rooted in honesty, in mutual respect, in love that wasn't tied to crisis or control. And then I let go. I sat on the balcony that night with a glass of wine, the Boston skyline glowing in front of me, and I finally let the weight drop. The grief, the old wounds, the hope that they might someday become the parents I needed. That version of the story was over. And for the first time, I wasn't scared of what came next. You ever carry a burden so long you forget what it feels like not to? That's what my life had become before Boston. A collection of quiet battles I never talked about, just kept pushing through like survival was the only goal. But now, sitting in that apartment with Jamie, looking out at a skyline that didn't carry the weight of old ghosts, I started to realize something. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. It took time to adjust to that idea. I had spent so many years bracing for the next emotional ambush, the next guilt trip, the next emergency that would magically align with something good happening in my life. For a while after cutting off my parents, I kept waiting for the backlash to come crashing through the walls. Some new manipulation, some distant cousin with a message about forgiveness or family ties. But it never came, because this time I'd closed the door for good. And on the other side of that door, life was quiet, beautiful, steady. Jamie and I were settling into a rhythm: work, coffee dates, long walks on weekends. We started planning weekend road trips to places we'd only talked about before. Her friends became our friends, and slowly, I realized that family wasn't defined by blood. It was defined by effort. By love freely given, not bargained for. Still, Neil stayed on my mind. We didn't talk every day, but when we did, it felt real. Not like old times, because those had been built on a lie, but something new. Something cautious, but honest. Then one evening, he texted me, "I'm in town for work next week. You free for dinner?" I hesitated, not because I didn't want to see him, but because I wasn't sure what seeing him again would feel like. The first meeting had been raw, emotional. But now we were further down the road. The shock had worn off. The truth was fully out in the open. Dinner meant dealing with the now, not just the past. But I said yes. We met at a quiet restaurant near our place. Jamie came with me this time. I wanted her there not just as support, but as part of my life. I wasn't interested in hiding pieces of myself anymore, not even from my brother. Neil showed up on time. Looked better. More grounded. Like he'd slept in his own skin for the first time in a long while. When he saw Jamie, he smiled, not one of those fake family smiles, but a real one. "Thanks for letting me crash dinner," he said. Jamie shrugged. "You're not crashing. Just finally showing up." That set the tone. We talked about work, Boston weather, his job. He told me about a project he was working on, how he'd actually gotten a small promotion. His voice lit up when he said it. And for once, I didn't feel bitterness or envy or resentment. I felt proud. After dinner, we walked outside. Jamie went ahead to grab coffee from a shop across the street, giving us a moment. That's when Neil said, "There's something I need to tell you." He paused, eyes on the sidewalk. "I'm going no contact with them too." I looked at him. "Are you sure?" He nodded. They found out I was in Boston and started texting again. At first, it was all sweetness. "Hope you're doing well. Thinking of you." Then when I didn't respond, it turned to guilt. "Mom said I'd abandoned her. Dad sent me a long message about how I'd let you poison me." He took a breath. "But here's the thing, I didn't feel guilty. Not this time. I just felt tired. Tired of performing. Tired of pretending their kind of love was ever healthy." He looked me in the eye. "I'm not doing it anymore. I'd rather build something real with you, even if it's slow, even if it's messy, than live another year in their fantasy. I didn't speak right away. Just nodded. That was all he needed. Back home that night, Jamie curled up beside me on the couch and said, "You okay?" I looked at her and realized, for the first time in a long time, I didn't have to think about my answer. "Yeah," I said. "I really think I am." She smiled. "Good. Because we've got that housewarming brunch next weekend and I'm not letting you cancel this time." I laughed. I wouldn't dare. And just like that, the moment passed. But it stayed with me, tucked into the quiet parts of my chest where old pain used to live. Because now there was space. Space for something better. Something earned. Something new. Brunch came that next weekend and I didn't cancel. Not because I felt obligated, but because I actually wanted to be there. That's something I never thought I'd say, me, the guy who used to fake headaches to avoid birthday parties, who'd spend holidays alone just to dodge the minefield of family drama. But this was different. This was our space. Our people. Jamie had turned our Boston apartment into something that felt lived in, filled with light and warmth and the smell of fresh bread she somehow managed to bake while juggling a research schedule most people wouldn't believe. The table was crowded with mismatched mugs, second-hand plates, and the laughter of friends who never asked me to shrink myself to fit their comfort. It was the first time in years I looked around a room and didn't feel like an outsider. I felt chosen. Not by force or guilt, but by people who saw me and stayed anyway. Neil came too. He arrived early, brought a fruit tray he'd actually prepared himself, grapes cut, kiwi peeled, strawberries halved with a little too much precision. He looked nervous, like a kid walking into a classroom mid-semester. But when Jamie handed him a mimosa and one of her signature eyebrow raises, the tension cracked. He blended in. Not perfectly, not seamlessly. But enough. After most of the guests left, Jamie stepped out with her sister to walk the dog, giving Neil and me the kind of space that used to feel awkward but now felt necessary. We sat on the balcony looking out at the city, the hum of traffic below us like a lullaby we'd both learned to stop fearing. Neil was quiet for a while, then said, "You ever think about how different things could have been? If Mom and Dad had just treated us like equals?" I thought about that for a second. "Yeah," I said. "All the time." But then I remember something my therapist told me a few weeks ago: grieving what you never had is just as real as grieving what you lost. He nodded slowly. "Makes sense." There was a long pause. Then he said, "I wish I could go back and undo it. All of it." I shook my head. "Nah, you don't get that. But what you do get is this showing up now. And staying." He looked at me, eyes glassy. Not in that performative way he used to do as a kid, but raw. Real. Tired. "I'm staying," he said. "I want to be your brother. For real this time." That did something to me. Something I didn't see coming. I stood up, pulled him into a hug, and for the first time in my adult life, I didn't flinch when my brother touched me. I didn't brace myself. I didn't think of the past. I just let it happen. We stood there a while, two people who'd finally made it through a storm neither of us fully understood until we were on the other side. Later that night, after Neil had left and the house was quiet again, Jamie curled up next to me on the couch. The light from the TV flickered across her face, and I caught myself watching her like I used to when we first met, like she was a lighthouse pulling me to shore. "You good?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah, I am." "You think you and Neil are really gonna be okay?" I thought about it. "I think we've both got a lot to learn," I said. "But yeah, we're finally starting on the same page. And that's more than I ever thought we'd get." She smiled. "You deserve that." And for once, I believed it. The truth is, family doesn't always start with the people who raised you. Sometimes it starts the day you choose yourself, the day you walk away from the noise, the guilt, the endless demands, and finally decide to be seen. And when you do, sometimes, just sometimes, the people who matter most find their way to you anyway.